Mental Health Monday with Mick Coyle.
Radio City Talk.
And we're back for another edition of Mental Health Monday on Radio City Talk. My name is Mick Coyle, and we've got a great guest who's going to be having a really important conversation with us here in the studio. And a great guest who I met at a networking event, the World Mental Health Day event organised by the Lee Cooper Foundation at the Sefton Park Palmhouse. And I think, Paul, this is the first time I've ever been to a networking event and actually come away with actual people whose business cards I've actually used and networked with.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the amount of money organisations spend on business cards, we could probably sort all of this mental health problems out.
You get people going, don't they? If you go to a networking event, normally it's got coffee, tea, apple juice, Danish pastries.
Yeah.
Eat them, then leave as quickly as possible. That's the general rule, isn't it?
Yeah, that's normally the standard. I think we're always trying to get people selling us websites, insurance or accountants. So, it's the first one I think ourselves have come away with where it's been something really positive.
Yeah, meeting actual people whose work you can sort of collaborate with. And I thought, well, perfect opportunity today. But it was a great day.
Yeah,
well organised by the Lee Cooper Foundation, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the Lee Cooper Foundation is very inspirational. And to be honest, I didn't really know about them before we went to that event. And since going to that event, we've not only developed a partnership, but Lily, who organised the event, is now working for Care and Connections.
Oh, there we go.
So we've took her on as a young persons coordinator to help lead our suicide bereavement work for young people.
Just tell us about the geography of this one, because we were meeting in the Sefton Park Palmhouse in Liverpool. The Lee Cooper Foundation operate out of Knowsley, but are expanding out all the time. Yeah. There's a Knowsley influence to the work you do with the Barbara Bettle Foundation.
Yeah, I mean, we work across Knowsley, but it's across Merseyside. We've got an office in the city centre. We've got one in Sefton and one in Whittle. So we're Liverpool City region wide with this, to be honest. We have office space, but we also do things in people's homes, community venues. So it's really a Liverpool City region initiative. So
we've got Paul Growney with us in the studio, this week's guest on Mental Health Monday from the Barbara Bettle Foundation. We'll start, Paul. Do you want to tell us who Barbara Bettle was, where the name comes from?
Yeah, just to start with, Barbara Bettle was a relation of mine, was a close relative. And sadly, we lost Barbara to suicide in November 2015. And I think we chose to name the service and the project after Barbara because it was a very sort of typical story in that it was someone you'd never expect to lose their life to suicide. Life and soul, the party, great job, love and family, never really experienced mental health issues prior. You'd have just never expected it, and then one day, bang, it happens, and then a whole family, community is changed forever, and the devastation it left behind was, still exists to this day.
The work you do now through the Barbara Bettle Foundation is about the effects of suicide, the impacts of suicide as well, but also for those who become at risk of suicide as a result of experiencing a suicide within the family as well.
Yeah, I mean, the focus of the Barbara Bettle Foundation is very much supporting people who've been bereaved by suicide because, again, through the personal experience, it was a massive gap and I felt there was a lot of service that was needed within that space. So what we do is we offer fully funded counselling, cognitive behavioural therapy with professional counsellors, group activities, no waiting lists. So it's very much focused on that group, really. And you find with the statistics, I mean, suicide bereavement, if you've been bereaved, you're 10% then more likely to take your own life yourself. You're 3 times more likely to have a recurrent suicide within the family. And I think it's something like 10% more likely to leave your job. There's statistics coming out of everywhere showing how much importance it is to support this group and what a complex sort of state these people are in.
Can I ask you about the starting point or the starting point that someone would come through the door? Because if you had a traditional bereavement service, I would imagine that the start point for most would be grief, one of grief of, the fact that you've lost somebody. But because suicide has this stigma around it and because there's, particular circumstances in play in regards to suicide, does that change the starting point, if you like?
Massively, and that's why we're such a niche service, because with a suicide you've got a lot of practical things as well, such as inquests, investigations. At times with many you've got media at your door. But a lot of it is around the why. Why did they do this? So some people may have anger. There may be the stigma from the local community. There's so much. There's so many complex issues around suicide that the person has to face. It makes I think the grieving process very, very difficult, and the people can't really have that closure because there's no prognosis as to actually why did the person do this. They may leave a note, they may not. The coroner may determine it's suicide. There's all these different issues.
I mean, in regard to that as well, the huge complexities, if you or I were to die by, let's say, heart attack, and people might go, well, and it'd be one of those stories, he was fit and healthy, he used to run marathons, but he had a heart attack, or he was very unhealthy, so no surprise, or there was a history of it within the family and so on. We've kind of built a narrative of understanding about, well, I can understand why it happened, or it happened, it's a shock, but I understand that it's happened. With suicide, because of the complexities of it, you must have to start with people by almost explaining mental illness to them as well. That must be hugely complex. You've got to take on a great deal of information in a way you maybe don't have to if somebody dies from one of the traditional sort of physical injuries or deaths.
Yeah, I mean, just in the situation with Barbara, I mean, you've got stuff where, to be graphic, but you'd have like the detectives on the scene, you'd have the police at the house, you'd have the police around the body, you'd have all these different things that make it such a traumatic situation. So you've got people coming to us not just with bereavement support, but with, post-traumatic stress, very, very complex issues, especially individuals who have maybe found their loved ones. So the people who come to us tend to be really complex, very emotive, in great need of support. But the good thing is they're seeking the support, they're coming to us. They're not with this project, we've been running it for like 3 years, and to tell you the truth, we've never really had to promote it because people have always just come to us through word of mouth, or some GPs have referred, but we've never had a process where we've had to go out and do leaflets and push and things like that.
How quickly have you found it benefits people to get into a service like yours quickly? I mean, many people will have experienced suicide of a loved one in the past. They've maybe haven't gone through bereavement services, and I'm sure you'd open your doors to them, months or even years down the line. What are the benefits that you see from getting someone through the door as soon as possible?
I think as one of them, I think it's very personalised, because some people, when it's very raw, it may not be that beneficial. They do say a period of the grieving process prior to going to counselling. Our counsellors and CBT therapists are very professional experience, and they'll sort of triage and make a judgment on that. And if they think it's not quite right, then they may refer them to another local service that it might be ready for then. So there is an emphasis on that triage service. But we have people I know who've come to our groups who haven't spoke about it for like 30 years. It's been like the sister or whoever has done it years ago, and they've never felt comfortable to talk about it. Whereas, they're coming forward now. Because again, it's these things, they don't leave it. It's not like it with most bereavements yet, they don't, but with suicide, it is very different.
We've got Paul Growney with us in the studio from the Barbara Bettle Foundation. They've got a really good website, which I'll point people in the direction of if you want to make contact with them. And Paul, many times on the programme when people have been on talking about being bereaved by suicide, they've told me about the reaction, the social reaction to suicide. Friends, good friends, best friends, no longer picking up the phone, no longer coming around, people actively crossing the road to avoid the conversation. You must hear stories like that all the time. I find them so shocking, but I don't find them surprising at all when I hear those stories now, that people who absolutely need the social support and the society just simply doesn't know how to respond.
I think I totally agree with you, Mick. I think that the conversation around suicide is very, very difficult. And as I say, I know from the experience with Barbara, at first, when it first happened, there was a lot of people, a lot of that sort of contagion of people. But then after maybe a month or two, it really starts dripping off to then now where people don't really talk about it. And it's a very, very difficult thing for people to even mention, because I know, like with my granddad and the older generation, suicide's looked at very different, especially in religious communities, because I remember, bringing the priest in and, doing the last rites and all this type of thing, and you could see the sort of views they had when we were doing that as well. And, people bring in the sort of argument, oh, it's selfish, they left children behind. So it does bring up a lot of issues, definitely. And then also people looking at you, like, why did they do it? There must have been something wrong. What was going on? So there's so much, as well as the grief that puts on the person. And especially with some cases you've seen where it's all over the newspapers and people are making their own judgments of what's gone on and the treatment they had and things like that. So it's, the families really have it tough. And then having to stand up in coroner's court as well, with the inquests, it's you got to have it tough to do that.
Well, and I was going to say, in doing that, the grief, the bereavement, the physical bereavement, the reaction that you have to it as well, plus then the social stigma that comes around it, and then those added complexities of the police at the door and the coroner's inquests and the media interest that might come around that as well. You're adding layer upon layer of added anxieties and stresses and pressures on people who I guess need time. They need time to deal with something themselves.
Yeah, and that's why, Mickey, you see the statistics, which are all showing that the people who are bereaved by suicide, they have this very poor prognosis of their own mental health and their own well-being. So that's why I think it's vital that the work like ours and, the mental health strategy and the suicide prevention strategy does put a very core emphasis on post-vention, because even though it's post-vention, it's very much a preventative element to stop them people's mental health deteriorating and losing potentially someone else to suicide.
Is social isolation an issue for those who've experienced a loved one taking their own life?
Yeah, again, I mean, I was going through, some statistics. I was swatting up again, prior to coming, and yeah, that's social isolation is a massive thing, but I think that's a massive thing in mental health in general. And if I would say one thing I saw in Barbara's case, which I'd have said was the straw that broke it, was becoming socially isolated. And I think there's a real gap between the clinical and the community model. You can have all the medicines and talking therapies you want, but then if you're going home and there's not a link to something in the community or something to get you out or support you getting back into work or whatever, that to me is when you can see people drastically going down.
And the pointers are there, the stats back that up. I've mentioned this many times and I'll mention it again now, but I've said, for me, the next big crisis, which is the next one on from, the mental health crisis, is that people will start talking about social isolation, not realising, I don't think, that they're talking about a mental health issue. There's a perception now, because we've all got Facebook and Twitter and all that we've never been better connected. But actually, the reality is we're going in the other direction. We're becoming less likely to have time to communicate outside of work times. We're less likely to be able to find that time just for yourself within, beneficial environments, the clubs, the activity groups, the sports activities, because our lives are so complex and so busy at the moment.
Definitely. I think social isolation, and again from the organisational perspective, the work with with older people, because when you look at the biggest increasing group in suicide at the moment, I think is men between 45 and 49. That's the biggest risk. So I think if you look at some of the things that the government are doing around social prescribing and trying to have that prescription to link it into community service, I think they all sound really good, but you need people working together, and I think at the moment people aren't working together as much as they should be. Yeah,
but wouldn't it be great though if you could do that social prescription without having to go to your GP?
Yeah.
That we'd have mates who'd go, hey, do you want to come and join this five-a-side football club? If you had like your workplace which said, you know what, with working here you get free pass for the gym.
Yeah.
Every Tuesday and Thursday or something like that, that if that social prescription started a lot sooner, it wouldn't be then sort of almost like last chance saloon for people who are then finding themselves in the sort of the GP's waiting room, hoping there's a solution for them in their area, which there might not be, depending on funding, depending on where they live.
It is, and it is, again, it's a very difficult thing, I think a difficult topic, but I think you have to have that accountability as well in yourself to support in your own, getting well. And I think, at the moment with social prescribing and things like that, it's great, But there needs to be funding put into what you're prescribing to. It can't be just we're prescribing to this service that's underfunded, that can't take enough people, can't see enough people. It's got to raise grants, it's got to fundraise for money. Yet if this is something people are serious about, then you have to invest in it seriously. And I think that is an issue at the moment, definitely.
Am I right in saying, Paul, you work as well with families, that you can sit down in a family group as well? Does the dynamic sometimes shift between an individual and a team, if you like?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I know we've got case studies where we've supported both the mum, daughter and son separately in separate settings. But again, our counsellors are really good and very flexible, and I think that's what's the good thing about our service. It's self-referral. You can phone up and book it, and you can tell our counsellors, what support you need or what you're looking for, and then if we can, we'll try and accommodate it. Because as I say, as we're not a statutory service, we're not sort of bound by saying, right, we've got to see this person here, we've got to follow this referral pathway. We'll always do it. Our big thing's about being safe and risk assessment and all that type of stuff, but we try and do our best to make sure it's personalised to the needs of the individual coming through our door.
And in terms of where you work and how people can get in contact with you as well, the website, if you type in Barbara Bettle, Bettle Foundation, it's the first thing that comes up. But if people are listening to this across the city region, what will be the process if they were to contact you? Yeah,
so if you called us on 01512892761, you'd speak to someone in the office, they'd take your details, and then either one of our counsellors or Laura, who coordinates the project, would get in touch with you to arrange the next steps. And probably the next steps would be a telephone conversation with one of our counsellors. And then the next would be, if appropriate, a face-to-face visit in a venue that is appropriate for both. So we do things at the weekend, after work, and as I say, we do it across the city region, so it's not just in Knowsley.
And that's fully funded?
Yeah, at the moment, it's fully funded.
Which is great news there. Is it frustrating, or do you get frustrated by the fact that people are coming to you and finding you, but there must be many people who aren't getting you as a statutory service, that aren't sort of automatically being prescribed to contact you as well? Yeah. There must be many people who you can't reach or you don't reach.
Well, definitely. I think what we do really is a bit of a drop in the ocean. I mean, we're really championing the cause of people bereaved by suicide. I mean, when you look at it, I think last year's statistics showed, I think it was 6,500 people across the UK took their life, which was 11% increase on the year before. But I think they say, in terms of people who are affected by suicide negatively by that number, it's about 30 times that number. So if you're talking 6,500 times 30, I haven't got the maths there, but that's how many people within the UK are negatively affected by suicide that potentially would need a service like ours. So it really is a drop in the ocean in terms of what we provide. But if you look at it in terms of financial investments, research done by the National Suicide Prevention Alliance shows that each suicide costs approximately £1.7 million. And I was astounded by that. And I was like, well, how do you work that out? So they work it out through direct costs to the individual, such as, the medical and all that sort of stuff that went with their treatment, the funeral cost, the inquest cost. Then it'll have the indirect costs, so the medical treatment, the people who've been affected by it with, the days lost from work, and people who've left work and gone on disability, etc. So it's a really easy invest to save when you look at it. But again, with me sort of health hat on, it's a very, very tough time for our health system, just with every pressure. So I think invest to save things are really good ideas, but when we're at the crisis stage we're at now, with I think all of our services, we're kind of just plugging the hole, really.
I'll take a punt on a figure around about 195,000 on that maths, by the way.
Oh, is it?
I don't know if that's right, but that's what my brain has just thrown up. But actually, it just goes to show when governments talk and when politicians talk about mental health, maybe they're talking about stress and anxiety within the workplace. Maybe they're talking about PTSD from people leaving the armed forces. Maybe they're talking about postnatal depression or anything like that. It just goes to show the huge complexities of the mental health crisis we're facing in the country. That actually, the problem doesn't stop at a suicide.
Yeah.
If anything, suicide then creates further potential problems, and it can cause, recurrent suicide within a family group. But even if it doesn't get that far, the issues that can be created as a result of that suicide can still have a hugely damaging impact on people's lives. So when we look at how we're going to correctly fund these sorts of we're not looking at a few quid here, a few quid there. We're talking about a huge restructuring of how we view mental health. And we've got to look at each one of those individual aspects: stress, anxiety, PTSD, postnatal depression in men, and all those things, and go root and branch through all of them.
Yeah.
To get the right sort of services.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's vital that the community services are supported, because if I'm a GP and someone's coming to me and they're suffering from stress, anxiety, and it might be that, prescribe them this, but if you get to the root of the problem, it might be that, they're in debt or have got relationship breakdown and things like that. And if that issue is treated at that point, or there could be signposted into an appropriate service, it wouldn't be really the mental health you're dealing with, it's the debt issues you're dealing with. So I think it's this structure. I know in Wirral they have a really good service by an organisation called Involve Northwest. They have like a connectors programme. So they have a group of like trained staff who go around communities, connecting people to services that they need. So it might be that they're part of the improved access to psychological therapies, but it might be that they need that. So they'll have like an individual that support that person to get to that service they need. And I think it's things like this, but when you look at it probably with a finance hat on, it's like, well, how's that work? Is that going to be this? But when you look at the kind of science behind it and the method to it, it really makes sense. And I think a lot more of these type of things need to be invested in, but invested in properly. Can't be all volunteers doing it.
Well, I was going to say, because if you were to set up, let's call it, the Ministry of Mental Health, which might be a model like the one you just described on the Wirral, a lot of the people you'd need would already be there. Organisations like yourself, like Lee Cooper Foundation, like, Mallet in the Community, those organisations that have been on this programme recently, they're already there. And if they could be brought into that solution, that's something which then could be part of the statutory response to someone either affected by negative mental health or affected by something like a suicide.
Definitely, Mick. And I think, again, this probably wouldn't be popular, but I think the charitable sector as well is just as bad as any other. People don't work together as much as they should do. And we might have a project, and Joe Blogs down the road might have a project, and if you're the individual who needs support, you don't know. And if you've put your hand up and said, I feel suicide, well, which one should I go to? And I think it's a joined up approach across all sectors. And I think if you're going to invest a lot of money into sort of the charitable sector, then I think it needs to ensure that people are effectively working together. Exactly,
but wouldn't that be the case if that was a statutory funded service? Because one of the issues that charities have got, if you've got to justify your own existence, because these funding pots are only available to certain people. And it becomes a bit dog eat dog, because if you don't say you're better than the next one down the road, they'll get the funding. Definitely. And you won't, then suddenly the service doesn't exist at all.
Definitely, and that's what's happened. I think the nature of local authority and statutory commissioning has forced organisations to see themselves as competitors rather than partners. So you'll see some organisations where they're very cagey on, they want them service, they want them people for themselves. It's very performance statistics and all that numbers because it's related to the money. And then ultimately, it just becomes a detriment to the person, because we've all got this money to spend on public things. So, we should be working together. A lot of these consortium models, were developed a number of years ago, but none of them have worked because of these issues. So I think, again, we need to look at ourselves as a sector as well and not just say, oh, well, there's not enough money. I think there are pots of money, but it's not, things aren't being used effectively, I think.
The Barbara Bettle Foundation, up and running. You sit within the Caring Connections organisation, is that right?
Yeah, so Caring Connections is it's a registered charity, been around for around 30 years, and it specialises in the provision of home care across Merseyside. So we have about 50 care staff, and we tend to work with people, palliative care, end of life, older people. And a lot of our projects are around reducing social isolation. And when you look at the older population, it's massive for the older population. The people we go in and see who are on their own, they might only see people for half an hour a day to come in and do their care call. And I think this is again another area we as a society, I think we've done fantastically well at being enabling to keep people alive medically, but we need to ensure that we keep people alive with good quality of life. And I think we're not quite there yet in regards to that. If you've got a few bob, yeah, you sound, but if you haven't, then, you know, people can become very isolated very quick. And I think we need to, I think older people, we really need to look at what we do as a country for older people, I think.
The Barbara Bettle Foundation, up and about on online. If you type in the Barbara Bettle Foundation, BETTLE, that'll be the first thing I think that comes up on your Google hits if you're using that, or Bing, whatever it is that other people are using. We mentioned the phone number before, Paul. Is that one 0151 289 2761?
Got it in one.
There you go. That's 0151 289 2761 if you'd like to speak to Paul and the team, and you might want to refer somebody else. Can someone just give you a shout and say, look, I don't know if this is the right conversation to have, but you might be able to help me or a family member? Yeah,
we've had people, I've had people I know who've like emailed me over someone's mobile number who said they don't want to get in touch themselves, but can you speak to them for us? And that's the best thing. Sometimes people haven't got the courage to call themselves, but if you say, if you get in touch for them, that's no problem. We'll always do our best. We'll always, if the key thing is the person's got to want the help. If they don't want the help, we can't do nothing. But if they do, then we'll do our best.
The Barbara Bettle Foundation, I guess, this week on Radio City Talks Mental Health Monday. Paul Growney, thank you for your time. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme.
Mental Health Monday with Mick Coyle.
On Radio City Talk.